Well, before the break, I told you that actually there is no such thing as individual karma. My karma and your karma don't exist as something which is separate from the greater whole. After all, we are always part of a larger whole, of a group. In fact, any group of which you are a part is also part of a larger group. And that in turn is part of a still larger group, and so on. For example, we are part of a family. Family belongs to a city belongs to a country belongs to a planet, in our case, planet Earth. Does it stop here? Maybe for us, because our awareness doesn't reach further, but the planet is part of a solar system, is part of a galaxy, and so on. Now, what is a group? A group consists of a number of beings who on their evolutionary journey are in need of the same conditions and events in order to gain experience so they can learn and become wiser. There is a corresponding type of consciousness. Well, as a group, we have sown courses together, which as a group, as a collective, we will have to reap. Having sown together, we shall reap together. So we can define group karma as the sum of thoughts, feelings, and actions and reactions of the members of the group that arise from a particular mindset, a particular type of consciousness. For instance, a country may have a certain characteristic and therefore the population creates certain causes and harvests certain consequences, and that means that the country has a certain physical prosperity or not, or in that particular country there is a certain mental, spiritual climate, and so on. Yet, such a group is not isolated from a greater whole. Such a country is part of a continent, of the world, and of course, everybody within a group has his own specific causes, his specific motives for doing something or not doing something. So one harvests, in a sense, in his own way, although the general underlying cause is the same, collectively created. Take the pandemic as an example. Does the pandemic just come out of the blue? Is there no causality? And isn't that causality due to us? If you have read our magazine Lucifer on the pandemic, then you know that a kind of situation has been created collectively by humanity, that means by all of us, that's our karma, our group karma, the global karma, you may say, which made it necessary for us to reap what we interpret as a disaster. Yeah? By the way, that Lucifer is available for free on our website. You can also subscribe to it. Now, what is the mindset that causes the corona pandemic? Well, I describe it as a petty mentality in a big world. On the one hand, borders have fallen away. Airplanes take you from one place on Earth to another place in a couple of hours. We can maintain contact with almost everybody on Earth, thanks to the internet. Our food, medicines, cars, clothing comes from places thousands of miles from where we live. But on the other hand, we have a petty mentality. We are narrow-minded, focused on our self-interest, focused on what we call national interest, for which we sacrifice much, if not everything. On the one hand, you see a very small group that is really ridiculously rich, individuals who possess more than entire nations, and the gap is even widening. And on the other hand, you see many millions of people who live on $1 or $2 a day. People who live in streets, no access to medical care, no access to education, not to mention the millions and millions of refugees around the world. Is that a harmonious situation? Shouldn't that lead to consequences? Perhaps most poignantly, how disharmonious the world is the way we treat animals. On the one hand, we buy the most expensive meat for our dogs and cats. We treat them like kings and queens. But on the other hand, we tolerate that millions of pigs, cows, goats and chicken are cooped up in very small pens where they cannot be themselves in any way. And why? For the benefit of our consumption. We want cheap meat. Do you think that such a disharmonious situation should not lead to disasters? We live as if there is no such thing as cause and effect, as if karma does not exist, but it does exist. But as I said before, karma is also the doctrine of hope, not the illogical hope, as if everything will work out well without us having to do anything for it. No, it's a doctrine of responsible hope. It appeals to our responsibility. Karma has caused us to be in the situation we are in now, but it will also take care of our future situation, so to speak. And therefore it's good to realize that there are three kinds of karma. Karma that was caused in previous lives and cannot manifest itself yet. This is the karma that lies, so to speak, in the storehouse of our consciousness. The circumstances are not yet ready. We cannot harvest it yet. Suppose you as a woman sought some causes in a past life, the consequences of which you can only reap as a woman, and suppose in this life you are a man. So then you will have to wait until a new incarnation. Or what is also possible is that other causes of a different type, a different orientation, are so strongly present that they temporarily suppress other karmic causes, so to speak. That karma can express itself when the other stream of karmic causes has worked itself out. Imagine someone had in a past life two tendencies. He was very interested in spirituality, but he was even more interested in sport or something else, it doesn't matter. Now until that flow has dried up, there will be room for other causes. You can imagine that firstly, those causes of sport will have to work itself out, and only when that has worked itself out, then the other causes can manifest themselves. Of course, it's also possible that these two causes work themselves out more or less simultaneously. There are as many possibilities as there are human beings, because everybody is unique. Second kind of karma, karma caused by actions and thoughts in this life, but whose manifestation only occurs in the next life. Of course, we see this happening very often. We see selfish people who can exploit others, scorn others, harass others, and there is nothing or no one to stop them. It seems like there is no reaction. No doubt there will be, but not necessarily in this life. Although sometimes we see that at the end of the life of somebody, the reaction is coming to manifest itself Just think of all the dictators who lived for many, many years, but at the end of their life are stripped of their power by the people after years of tyranny, and who often end up in very miserable circumstances. And the third kind of karma that is occurring now in this present life and is caused by actions and thoughts in previous lives or in this present life. This is the karma that is currently manifesting. It manifests itself incessantly in a seemingly endless series of events in our lives. As long as you don't know what causes you have sown in the past, you also don't know exactly what consequences will surge. And there are very, very few people, and fortunately so, I just told about it, who have conscious access to their past lives. And that makes us humble. That will also have to make us compassionate with respect to people who are suffering. Who knows what is in store for us? On this slide, you see exactly what I've just told you, karma from the past that is manifesting now or manifest in subsequent lives, and karma from this life and past lives that it's manifesting now. When you study these three types of karma, you'll also understand that although we don't know what it will look like, because we don't always know what causes we have sown, the future is not something uncertain in the sense that it could go either way, that it depends on coincidence or coincidental circumstances. No, the future is a logical continuation of the past. The future is not something waiting for us. The future comes upon us from behind. And this implicates that we can constantly work on our future. Every thought and action are causes that will take shape in the future. And the question then arises, why do people constantly make the same mistakes? We see, for example, that wars stem from an extreme sense of separateness, from the delusion that your own country, or even more dangerous, your own religion, is different or better than others, which lead all too quickly to war, to suffering, and great misery. We know that this process is taking place, and yet we constantly see countries or groups of people falling into the same trap. Now also, we see in individual situations that this is happening. A sad example is that of a woman who is constantly beaten by her husband, a lot of misery, and then a divorce takes place, and she marries again, and her new husband also mistreats her. Her character has thus apparently not changed, and she is naturally attracted to such painful situations. How should we prevent this from happening? How can we learn from our mistakes? Well, the first thing we could do is to listen to ourselves, not to the personality, not to the personal self, because that is precisely the one that always gets us into trouble. But we must listen to the wisdom we have already amassed in past lives. So listen to your conscience. What is your conscience? Our conscience is the sum total of all the ethical lessons we have learned in the past. We have learned ethical lessons in many, many lives. And in all those lives we have been placed many times before ethical dilemmas. And from these we have drawn conclusions, and these conclusions are stored up in our conscience. Although we are far from perfect, we certainly know in many, many situations how we have to act. You could say that our conscience is the highest part of our soul. So it's not our spirit, it's not the inner God. At this level, the level of the inner God, you rather speak of intuition, the immediate seeing of truth. Our consciousness becomes active the moment we want to do something of which we already know we should not do it. We have already learned that ethical lesson. That knowledge is already within us. Nevertheless, we are not always listening to our conscience. People are very good at listening to excuses that the personality whispers to them. Like, everybody does it. Yeah? Why should you be the only one? And that's why listening to our personality, to the excuses of the personality, that we often get into trouble. And therefore it's good to ask ourselves, how can we live in such a way that we no longer get into trouble? It's good to remember that we are part of that great web of destiny. How can we live in such a way that we do not disturb the dynamic harmony, because disturbing it will cause suffering. And the only solution is by becoming aware of the totality, by thinking, trying to experience that there is an inseparable connection between all beings. In short, by taking everyone into account in our thinking. I will give you an example. There was in America not so long ago a shooting incident at a high school. A boy had shot his teacher. That boy's classmates were interviewed and most reacted with anger, indignation, and lack of understanding towards the perpetrator. But there was also a girl in that class who thought differently about the incident. Like everybody else, she thought it was a terrible, a horrible thing to do. And her heart went out to the teacher and his family. But she also said, and this was remarkable, that it was a terrible thing for the perpetrator himself as well, and for his family. She was the only one in her class who wondered how the boy, so early in his life, could have derailed in such a way that he could kill his teacher. She hadn't noticed anything abnormal in his behavior in class. And she pondered, how could this boy ever reconnect with the other side of him, the better side of him, which she had also seen in him. She saw very clearly that the act was wrong, of course, but she tried to perceive the human being behind the act, and she did not reject him. She thought about solutions for everybody. She was involved both with the victims and their family, and with the perpetrator and his family, because she knew that everyone matters. And this is an example of someone in whom the higher nature is starting to break through. She no longer responds only to emotions, but tries to live from understanding. So what can we do if we want a brighter future for everybody? Well, we cannot change another, but we can be the directors of our own lives. And therefore, let us live from the higher aspects within ourselves, all aspects in which the ego prevails, in which the personality prevails, aspects that cause us to live in the feeling of being separate from others, will lead to disharmonious consequences. And why? Because we are not separate, because there is unity. Thoughts and actions that rise above the personal sense of separateness will lead to harmonious consequences, to peace, to harmony, to justice for all. H.P. Blavatsky says in a little book, but a beautiful, very beautiful book, The Voice of the Silence. Help nature and work on with her, and nature will regard thee as one of her creators and make obeisance. Work on with nature means to give up all personal aspirations, knowing you are one with nature, and therefore never demanding more than is necessary, therefore always identifying yourself with the big picture, with all humanity, or even better, with all living beings. But what are we to do with the wrongdoers? With people who so clearly violate natural laws? You know it. There are many of them, violators, exploiters, white-collar criminals, and so on. Well, do fight injustice, but never the wrongdoer. We do, of course, have to protect society from injustice and violence, but that doesn't mean that we have to use the same method as the wrongdoer or perpetrator of violence used. The tendency to punish is a form of evil. It's giving in to feeling of revenge, of retaliation, to the Mosaic law of an eye for an eye, which ultimately makes the whole world blind and leads us down the downward spiral of violence. So leave the punishment to the impersonal law of karma, for it can do so much justly and so much better than even the most impersonal of judges. So let me give you some ancient advice given by Pythagoras and other wise men of the past. That advice is, stop for a moment. Stop for a moment when events occur in your life and ask yourself, how did I end up in this situation? What role did I play in it? What could I have done differently? What could I have done better? Did I have the welfare of everybody in mind, or just my own? It's a good habit to do it every night before you go to sleep. Let the day's events pass your mind, and should anybody have wronged you, if anybody has been unkind to you, forgive him, because he doesn't know better. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, it has been rightly pointed out that the doctrines of reincarnation and karma are the great missing factor, the great missing link in Western civilization. These doctrines are so logical, answer all the questions, and encourages to righteous behavior. They are a strong fundamental for ethical life. If only a small percentage of the population assumed karma and applied this doctrine in their lives, then a very large portion of the problems and disharmony in our world would already have disappeared. And that's why we do not tire of constantly spreading these teachings. Well, there's another break for 3 minutes, and then we try to answer your questions again. Well, here are again. There are some questions. Aaron, please.
Yes, the first question is, what's good for the bee is good for the hive and vice versa, but how do we learn to get to this highest conscious self?
Yeah. Well, there are people who think that you cannot teach or learn to be compassionate. We don't agree with it, because you can learn to be suprapersonal, impersonal. And how do you do that? Well, you have to make use of that axiom: thought, action, habit, character, reincarnation. So you have to start with your thinking, with your mind. That's why we give a course, Thinking Differently. Start with thinking. And if you start with thinking idealistic thoughts. So make for yourself an image, a thought image, an image in your mind of the most idealistic society, of the most idealistic group of people you can imagine, and of a human being who is a part of such a group. Yeah? What does he look like? Not, of course, in his body, but in his mind. What does he think? Well, and if you give your attention to that picture, to that mind picture, you slowly will become it, because your thoughts are changing, your actions and your habits are changing, and your character are changing. And because your thoughts are changing, you will automatically receive thoughts of another level. Because thoughts, like everything else, are living beings. And if you focus on more impersonal, idealistic, unselfish, compassionate thoughts, yeah, you will receive those thoughts. So you will living on another level. That doesn't mean that you have to change and go to another country. No, you will be the person who lives in the same house, goes to the same shops and do the same work, but your vision on the things you do, because your mind changes, will change. So if you look at the hive, at the totality, and make thoughts, think thoughts that are good for the hive, for the totality, then automatically you will change to another level. Your inner radio, so to speak, will vibrate on another station, and you will hear, in that same comparison, other music, more beautiful music, impersonal music, suprapersonal music. So it's just trying to do it, and keep on keeping on, and you will reach at that level.
Okay. Can you say something about unmerited suffering? What does that mean? Is that also a kind of karma?
Yes, that's a term that HPB uses in the key to Theosophy. Well, she uses it in this sense. If I, in my life, as a personality in this life, I am confronted with a lot of suffering, and I don't know the cause, because the cause is from another life. In a sense, it is unmerited, because I didn't, in this personality, yeah, if I speak for myself, I didn't cause it as Barend Voorham. No, I caused it in a former life. So this personality doesn't know anything about it, but yet is confronted with that kind of suffering. However, if you look in the big picture, it was, of course, me in a former life, in another personality, who causes the disharmony I'm reaping now as suffering. I give you a comparison. Imagine a boy of 20, 21, 22, drinks a lot of alcohol. But at the age of 30, he thinks, I stop, because it's not good for my health, it's not good for my mind. Then at the age of, let's say, 70 or 80, he reaps the consequences. Yeah, maybe he gets ill or whatever, because of his abuse of alcohol in his youth. Then you may say, from the standpoint, from the perspective of that old man, it is unmerited, because he didn't do it as an old man, but he did do it as a young child or as a youngster. So it's always karma, there is not such thing as unmerited karma, but from the perspective of the personality, you may say it's unmerited because this personality didn't cause it, but the former personality.
We have two questions about animals. The first is, why is it that animals must go through so much suffering? We humans are responsible, but they must live through it. And I also think of the wild, where they are each other's food. Why is that phase now in nature?
Well, that's a very, very difficult question, because then you have to go back to former time periods, long, long, long ago. So our planet Earth, is also a living being. Yeah, it's being born and dies. So in the former life of our planet, we, as human beings, but we weren't human yet, were there. And the animals, not animals yet, but plants, or maybe animals, but not the animals they are now, were there. And so there are causes which go back for millions, trillions of years. But we are connected. The animals are connected to us. We are connected to the animals. So in those long forgotten times, we also created causes which we have to reap now. And that's why we belong to the animals, and the animals belong to us, to the earth animals and the earth human beings. There's another thing that is very important, and that is that, in fact, we are the gods for the animals. The direction of the evolution of the animals is towards a human being. Not that they will be humans in this manvantara, as we call it, in this embodiment of the planet Earth, but in the next embodiment they may become human beings. But anyway, there's a close connection, and the direction of the animals is towards a human being. Just as a human being, the evolution, the direction of humans is towards the gods, divine beings. Well, the thoughts we think and the emotions we have, are kind of astral food for the animals. So they automatically, instinctively copy the habits of human beings. So if we are selfish and live from our desire, the influence we have on the animals will be on that same level. So that's why you see a lot of struggle and fighting in the lower realms of nature. But luckily, it's not all misery in human kingdom. We see a lot of compassion, and we see also unselfish thoughts. And if you look to the animal kingdom, you see the reflection of compassion also in the animal kingdom. Yeah, if you go to YouTube, and you will find a lot of movies about, a lion who adopts a little antelope, or a polar bear who plays with a dog. He's very hungry, and he could kill that dog in just 1 minute, but he plays with it, and then he goes away. So there's compassion in the animal world as well. That's also a reflection of our human mentality. So if we change our mentality, if human beings change, and that is predicted in the Bible, and in other scriptures as well, there will be a change also in the animal kingdom. The little child will play with the serpent, and the lion is playing with the antelope, and so there's in the Old Testament of the Bible there is something about that. So that is possible if we change, if we go to a higher level of consciousness, because we are you know, the examples for the animals, they follow us on their level.
Next question about animals. Different religions, philosophies have different opinions on whether animals reincarnate or are subject to karma. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, for us it's very, very simple, because everything is karma. Everything is subordinate to the law of cyclicity, universal laws. So each animal, each plant, each atom, each cell, each planet, the sun, you name it, is subordinate to cyclicity, and cyclicity cannot exist without cause and effect, without karma. So every animal dies and is reborn again. And just like a human being, slightly on a higher level, because each animal learns a little bit. Of course, the lessons of animals are different than the lessons of humans. We are evolving our manas aspect, the thinking aspect, and animals doesn't have evolved the manas aspect yet. So they are evolving on their instinctive animal evolution, but they are, in their way, also becoming even more universal within the limits of the animal kingdom. And of course, there are no limits. In the far, far future, the forest animals will enter the human kingdom as the human beings will enter the kingdoms of the divinities, of the gods.
Another question, is it useful to become karma-less, so without karma?
Oh, that's impossible in our view, because everything is karma. You are karma, we are cause and effect. I know the term is used in the sense that you don't saw any personal lower causes, and consequently won't reap any lower or personal consequences, and that simply means that you are going to another level of consciousness. The Buddhist calls it nirvana. Well, in that sense, it's possible that you leave the human kingdom and go to a higher kingdom, nirvana. But I do want to say that this is not the purpose of the Theosophical Society, because for us compassion is the most important, and we will try at least always to have contact with society, with our fellow human beings, because our purpose is that we, as a humanity, collectively, we will raise, we will go forward, we will evolve to a higher level. And not just one person, which is, in fact, although it is spiritual, a kind of spiritual selfishness. And if you want to leave your personal karma behind you, you want to go to another stage, to nirvana, to moksha, as the Hindus call it, well, that's your desire, your individual desire to be blessed. And I can't not be blessed if everything that lives have to suffer. So for us, it's not an option.
Last question. What is the reincarnating ego? You said that the ego does not function in the upper triad.
Well, let me see where I can find it here. The reincarnating ego is another word for the higher manas. So the lower manas is our personality, the mask, persona, Latin word means mask, that the real human being, the reincarnating ego, uses by each new incarnation, the personality. So the higher manas is the real man. And then we have the buddhi and the atman, which you may call the higher self. And if you focused on it, you will see more details. There is another diagram which shows it better, which I didn't use because for reincarnation I thought this is enough, not to make it too difficult. But the higher manas is the reincarnating ego who survives each incarnation, and the super personal aspect, thoughts of the lower manas, yeah, will go when man dies to the higher manas, yeah, is assimilated in the higher manas, and then the higher manas will withdraw into the bosom of the monad, as we call it, in Atman, have his blissful rest, and then again, a new incarnation, the higher manas, yeah, will send out a stream of consciousness which will attract all the elements, the living building blocks, will build up the karma, the prana, linka sharira, stula sharira, and the baby is born again, and so on. So the higher manas is the reincarnating ego.
Thank you. Those were the questions.
Okay, thank you. Well, we end with an invocation, the Gayatri from the Rig Veda, very ancient Gayatri, and it is an appeal to our higher self, to Atman. And in this Gayatri, it is presented like a sun, but it's not the sun we see luckily in the Netherlands here today at the sky, but it is our inner sun. O thou golden sun of most excellent splendor, illumine our hearts and fill our minds, so that we, recognizing our oneness with the divinity, which is the heart of the universe, may see the pathway before our feet and tread it to those distant calls of perfection, stimulated by thine own radiant light.